And what you need to do is say, what did I do then that I can write about now? What experiences did I have, both good and bad? And how can I bring them to my work so that when people pick it up, it's in the mouth, it's in the taste. You can actually feel it. And it's not just, and the monster came out of the woods and he grabbed him by the leg and pulled it off. You don't want that unless it's a joke.
Welcome. You're listening to PaleoCheeze Podcast, Episode 11, Part 2, with special guest Joe R. Lansdale, discussing Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Joe picked Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, one of his favorite movies. I had seen it before. Jeremiah had not. It's based loosely on fact. The film tells the story of Wild West outlaws Butch Cassidy and his partner, the Sundance Kid, who are on the run from a U.S. posse after a string of train robberies. It's directed by George Roy Hill, who also directed The Sting and The World According to Garp, Slapshot. I remember seeing that as a kid. And Funny Farm. It stars Paul Newman and Robert Redford and Catherine Ross. And it was written by William Goldman, who I love that guy, man. He's written some. I just read Magic a couple months ago, and I think
it's great.
Temple of Gold was probably my first coming of age book I ever read.
I love that book too.
Yeah, that was my dad's one of his all-time favorites, and one of the first books when I finally started reading books, that was one of the
great
first ones
novel.
that I read.
It's fantastic. Or Your Turn to Curtsy, My Turn to Bow that he wrote. Also, it's
I have it.
Novel.
I have it. I have pretty much all his stuff, but I haven't read it. But so 1969 came out, and Jeremiah, you enjoyed it.
Yes, man. I was actually bummed that I hadn't seen it already. Like, I knew about it. I'd seen the iconic picture. I mean, it's so iconic. The freeze frame at the end that became the image. In fact, maybe the greatest freeze frame of all time. But yeah, I was amazed I hadn't watched it because, as I said to Joe earlier, I grew up on that stuff, man. My dad was a Nick at Night guy. He still is. He watches Andy Griffith every night when he goes to sleep. He lives out in Palm Springs. And he owns a tour company called Celebrity Tours, and the whole point is to bring people out to see Elvis's home and, Old Blue Eyes and, Bob Hope. And so, he's got Marilyn Monroe. They've got all that stuff, and it tells all this story. So he lives. I mean, it's like his life. And yet this movie somehow slipped through the cracks. And so when you mentioned that Joe wanted to watch this, I was so, man, Joe, I ain't even gonna lie, I was so happy. Plus, we had just talked, Chad, we just talked about how, because we try to mix in a bunch of different styles of movies, and I had mentioned Western, and that's kind of, we're like, well, we'd have to really think of what Western we want to do, there's some that we were thinking about, so when you brought it up, I said, yes, definitely 100%. But I loved it from the get-go. I mean, from the sepia tone, quiet beginning, Oh, man.
If you read the screenplay, it's all there. It's one of those screenplays that they just stuck it in the camera, and you don't usually see that. And in fact, the things that they did leave out were just marvelous, but they just had so much of it. But it's the most incredible screenplay I ever read. And I had never read a screenplay before I wrote my first screenplay, optioned it 11 times eventually and sold it. I'd never seen one. I just made one up. They said, can you write a screenplay? Yeah, I can do that. And so I did it. And then later when I saw Goldman's, it was similar in our approach because both of us came from being novelists and short story writers. So we kind of had the same mindset when we put it together, And but what people don't realize that are younger is that changed the course of not only films and Westerns, but films in general, because nobody had ever seen a Western where the guys ran. They're after them and they're fuck this. I'm not doing that. Let's go. Let's get on the horse and go. And, who are those guys? Yeah. And so it was different than so many Westerns because, John Wayne don't run, but Butch and Sundance, they did. And yet that's fairly historical. And the other thing that was wonderful about Goldman is that he knows how to write a scene that's unexpected or seems like it's going to be something else and then it isn't. And he knows how to write dialogue that is both poignant and humorous at the same time. And to me, I had never seen anything like that when I saw it. Now you see a lot of other things now that are influenced by it, either directly or indirectly. But that's what you got to understand, is that when that came out, there was nothing like it. And the original reviews weren't good. It was after a little bit that it had been around that people began to go, oh, wait a minute, the audiences are loving this. And then other people evaluated it, some reevaluated it, and it has become, since that time, a Western classic and my third favorite film of all time.
It's funny that you mentioned that about not running. I guess when William Goldman, when he first wrote the script and sent it out for consideration, there was one studio, the only studio that was interested in it, but they said under one condition, that they couldn't flee to South America. And Goldman protested, and he said, well, that's what happened. And the studio said, quote, I don't give a shit. So they said,
yeah.
All I know is John Wayne don't run away.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Goldman rewrote the script, but he didn't change. He just changed a couple little things, a few pages.
Right. Right. He had a way of doing that was interesting. And I learned a lot from reading things that he said about film later when I was doing it. A lot of times when you go in for film, they sometimes haven't even read the script, but they'll pretend to. Or if they have read the script, they don't know shit from Wild Honey most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say something like, well, you need more character. And what Goldman would do is he'd get a pad and he'd go, what do you, tell me exactly what you want. More character. It needs that, more of this. In other words, it was nothing. It was just these sort of, general things that they would suggest. And he would go home and write it the way he wanted to write it, or make a few changes, and they never noticed, because most of the time they don't even remember what they said. It's like he wrote a book called Which Lie Did I Tell?, which is very much dealing with a lot, and all of them are that way. I've dealt with some great producers and directors and stuff, but it is a lot like that. And I've dealt with people like that, and I just don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it.
That reminds me very much of David Lee Roth when he was touring with Van Halen, and they were one of the first bands to have like a big light show with a big stage and everything, and it was very dangerous. So in their writer, they asked for M&Ms, but for like, I think just blue or brown M&Ms. Yeah, and so I read David Lee Roth's autobiography, Crazy from the Heat, and he explains it in there. Over the years, there was just this urban legend that, oh, these guys are so picky. Well, the dude is smart, and the reason why he did that is because he knew that these people didn't pay attention, and he was concerned about their stage setup. Didn't want anybody getting hurt, and there were very strict, orders. And if people aren't paying attention, so if they found out they showed up and they didn't have just the brown M&Ms, they weren't doing it, because it was like reading the fine print.
Yeah, I get that completely. Film is a funny animal, and I love film, and I've liked working in film some, and I'm supposed to direct the film here. You got side line while the virus came along. It's the same time they were supposed to shoot The Thicket with Peter Dinklage in April, and that got sidelined. I was supposed to direct a film based on a story of mine that my son did the adaptation for. That got sidelined. But I love film, but yet film, unless you can control a lot of it, like John Sayles, it's a tough animal. It's a really tough animal. And when Goldman wrote Butch, nobody knew what that was. And then when somebody finally decided to do it, he got paid the largest screenplay fee that anyone at that time had ever been paid. I think it was probably, $500,000 or something, which, now wouldn't seem necessarily all that wonderful, but still, a good fee. And it not only, was a great success, it started his career as a screenplay writer and enhanced his career as a novelist, with Marathon Man and Magic and, Control and so on. And so, he, by sticking to his guns and by George Roy Hill saying, we're going to shoot this, not what you want, we're going to shoot this. And he was big enough to get it done at that time. They created a classic. It's example like, Sam Peckinpah always complained that, somebody was always redoing his stuff, re-editing his material, like Major Dundee and things like that. So it was the same thing that they were trying to do, but it's one of those rare cases where they didn't. And so there was this great Western that dealt with Western tropes in unexpected ways, had two characters that were just endearing to you and that were very funny, played by two perfect actors. And Redford was not a star then. That movie made Redford a star. Because I recognized him from a couple of things, but he was in a Twilight Zone episode. But I didn't really know him. He was nobody to me. I went and saw it because it was Paul Newman. I didn't know anything about Goldman at that time either, because it was 1969 and I was still in high school. And I went and saw that, and every chance I got, I'd go back to the movie. And back then, you didn't have to leave. You could sit and watch it twice. And they would play it again because they didn't make you leave. And then that started later. But I sit there and watch that thing over and over and over. And every chance I ever got to go back to the film to see it, when it came to the drive-in, I went to see it. When it was on television, I saw it. I bought the DVD, or originally I bought the videotape, VHS tape. And so over the years, that movie has taught me a lot. It teaches me something each time. And one of the things he had was this perfect timing. And I don't remember if this was just in the script or if it actually appeared in the movie, but there's a scene where they arrive in Bolivia and there's nothing there but chickens and just this little place. And the Butch says, well, all of Bolivia can't be like this.
Right.
And Sundance says, how do you know? This might be the garden spot.
Yeah.
So those kind of unexpected things that you didn't hear in Westerns normally, but were really the kind of things that people might have said, and if they didn't, they should have. And it was just, or the scene where they're on the cliff and they're looking down at the water, and Sundance doesn't want to jump. And instead of just saying, look, man, he didn't want to admit he couldn't swim. And as Butch said, fall will probably kill you, but he didn't want to admit that. He was going to have a shootout rather than jump in the water or admit that he couldn't swim. So there were those moments like that were just wonderful. And Butch's ability to just bullshit with anybody. You keep on thinking, Butch, that's what you do best. And he's talking about, what is it that, I've got 20/20 vision and everybody else is wearing bifocals. That was, there's moments like that make it different than most Westerns, and especially in 1969. And then you had probably like the Wild Bunch and things like that were coming along. So it was that era into the early 70s were some of the greatest era of film ever. You not only had Butch, you had the Wild Bunch, you had Little Big Man, you had a Raging Bull. I mean, the list could go on and on and on. There were all of these incredible movies that were breaking ground and using actors or actresses that didn't look like the normal, handsome guy or always the regular kind of babe. Some of the women were beautiful, but different in the way that Hollywood had done it before. They looked more like, somebody of that era. And like you said, you have Westerns and you realize that everybody had 50s hairdos. All the women had 50s hairdos. Yeah. But in that era, there was this whole attempt to be realistic and yet to be bigger than real, to have hyperbole as well. And so there was this whole group of directors, writers, and actors who were doing just that.
I read something over at lateandtired.com, and he was talking about the strengths and things in the movie, and that one of them was that you feel almost as if you're part of it. And the long scene, for example, where they're running away from the super posse, right, that you never actually see. That's another thing that's unique about this. You don't really ever have a clear view of what exactly
they're guys riding off in the background.
Yeah, and you're always wondering, are they going to be, are they gone? And you're kind of left in this suspenseful state, wondering what's over the edge of the horizon, and all of a sudden, and here they come, and they're like, man, who are these guys and stuff. I told Chad, I said, it reminded me of this movie called Jerry. Was it Ben Affleck's brother, Chad?
Casey Affleck, yeah.
Yeah. And they're walking through the desert, and how long does that scene last? It's just them walking, and there's hardly any words.
The whole movie.
The whole movie, right? So
they're lost.
They're lost, but there's a long time where they're walking and it's quiet. There's no words, and you're almost wondering. You feel this drudging feeling as you're watching it, but you're in it. And I felt like in that scene that we were in it. But not only that, but that there were other things like that on the one hand they had. The things that you would typically find. You have the robbing the banks, you have the trains, they run around the West and everything. And yet on the other hand, they're down to earth. They're not these grand heroes. It's not a Zorro. It's not a Lone Ranger type person. And so you have this idea that they're real down to earth. You can imagine the conversations happening, the kind of humor that's taking place in the midst of dread. But also, it's about a partnership between them and not just overcoming a singular conflict.
Well,
right?
It's a love story too. It's a love story between those two men, as well as the love story that's between Butch and Sundance and Etta. They both love her. But it's this friendship, and that's where a lot of Hap and Leonard concept came to me, is that, and I had some dear friends at certain times in my life that I felt a bit close to, and it's really a love story in the sense of friendship, that kind of love, plus that whole thing with Etta. And in the end, they continue to do what they're doing, and they continue to stick with one another, and Etta goes home.
Yeah.
And at least in the movie, no one knows exactly what happened. But to me, that was what was fascinating about it, because you didn't normally see in Westerns either, where you would have the two friends that would show that kind of connection. It wasn't exactly unheard of, but to the degree that was, where they were like quarrelsome couple, that when they're having the final shootout there, they're like, I got an idea where we'll go. I don't want to hear it. And he goes, Australia. I secretly felt you wanted to.
Yeah, right.
And actually, my good impression, he really did want to know.
When I was watching that yesterday, I refreshed. I was watching it, and my wife had come in, and she came in during a part where, some of the music, in my opinion, wasn't that great in some of the scenes. She came in during a scene. It may have been a bicycle scene. I can't remember what it was.
Raindrops keep falling on my head. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a different scene with some really bizarre music, and I can't remember what it was. But with their riding on the horses and stuff. And then my wife comes in. She looks at the TV because I was in the bedroom watching it. She goes, I can't believe you're watching this, because she's used to me watching like before I take a nap, I'll put on some Italian horror film or something from the 70s. It's like just really bad dubbing, bad music, and I'll just like fall asleep watching it. And I said, it's good. You I think you'd like it. So she ended up sitting down and laying down and watching the rest of the movie with me for like the next I think the last half hour. And then today she goes, are there any more of those Sundance movies?
Yeah.
I was like, no. She goes, I really like that. I think I like the first half even better. And that part that you're talking about the writers, it reminded me of the Nazgul in like Tolkien's stuff. These writers off in the distance that they're kind of ominous because you don't know who they are. No. Yeah, it's what it reminded me of.
I couldn't get into it. I've watched the movies and enjoyed them, but I never could do Tolkien. I never could do those big high fantasy much, although when I was a kid, I read a bunch of them, Gormenghast and things like that by other writers but Tolkien I would try to, and I go, I can't keep up with the names, let alone.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with them. They just don't appeal to me, and I don't really, elves singing songs and stuff just didn't do a lot for me. I know George Martin and I have a different view of that. George is a big fan of that.
Oh, he would have to be, wouldn't he? Yeah. I don't, I've read The Hobbit and I've read the first two books in Lord of the Rings trilogy, but I think I read them because, and I enjoyed them, but I think I read them because it was just like, it was almost like I felt like I had to, because they were supposed to be classics but it was kind of sluggish. I'm glad I read them, but yeah, the names and stuff and some of the politics.
I tried it about 4 or 5 times. I have these great editions in there, and I just couldn't do it. A book that was like that for me for a while, and then when I read it, I thought it was brilliant. Was Moby Dick. Have you ever read Moby Dick?
I haven't read it. No.
Oh,
Jeremiah probably.
No, I haven't. That's what I told Jeremy Wagner. I said I hadn't read Moby Dick, and I hadn't seen Jaws, man.
Oh, and if you haven't seen Jaws, then your life is.
I know. I know. Well, I promised the listeners and him. He actually tweeted out to a Jaws fan page that we've got a virgin here, right? And he's a 40.
The book's good. The book's great. They're a little different in that when they did the film, I think they made it a little bit more friendly, because some of the characters are somewhat, at least one of the major characters, Hooper's somewhat different in the book. But I think it's one of the best suspense novels I've read. The construction is incredible. And I remember reading it and looking, and I had my feet up in the chair. And then when I went to the movies, I had my feet up into the chair. Now, it may not have the same impact now because it's been ripped off so much. But when I first saw that, I had never seen anything. It's so wonderful to see something that's never been before. And it's like The Exorcist, when we saw it then, there was nothing like that. It was an incredibly scary movie, even for an atheist. And so that kind of stuff was just frightening as could be, you know. And there are things that you see at certain times that mean more, but there are things like Butch Cassidy, which I think continue to resonate because there's so much about character. You know, the characters are still there. They're not going away. And some of the stuff, like, you know, you think, oh, that's a great scene where they blow up the train and all the money comes out. That's what really happened.
Yeah.
They did that, and they have photographs of it, and the train's all busted up, and they blew it all out. And the guy that wouldn't let him in, that was a real guy. And they actually encountered him twice in reality, and they put it in the film. And, you know, and he talked to Butch, you know. It wasn't personal. Woodcock was his name.
Woodcock.
And that you, Woodcock? Yeah. And so they encountered him twice just like in the film, you know. And so a lot of that stuff was very similar. And when that scene with the bicycle, a lot of people don't like. I actually love it. And The Raindrops Falling on My Head is not my favorite song, but the truth of the matter is a lot of the old songs of that era were beginning to be like that. They were starting to have that kind of sound. And I thought they captured that really well. And the whole idea that here he is with what was then modern technology, the bicycle, and then all of a sudden he gets rid of it. I'm not going to accept this. And we're going to go down south where it's still old, but you can't get away from progress. You can't get away from modern technology. It follows them. And in fact, it leads to, you know, gradually them being caught. You know, there's things like telegraph. In reality, there are things like telegraph. There are things like trains that became more and more efficient. There were cars beginning, you know, close to that era. And so you're beginning to have this whole different change. The Gatling gun or Hotchkiss, I guess that was a Gatling gun. And it was just a different sort of thing that was going on. And that's what they're trying to get away from. But you can't beat technology. You know, the world outgrows them.
And that they're in that fantastical period of transition. It comes in phases, you know, as technology grows and we begin to, like Marshall McLuhan says, it becomes part of us in a way. It's an extension of ourselves. And the whole idea of that the medium is the message. He says that whenever you're talking about a medium, kind of like a tweet, right? That the tweets, the words of it is the juicy, bloody meat that distracts the watchdog of the mind. And that the medium itself is the burglar, and it's kind of the same with the telegraph and the bicycle and the train and all of this. That no matter what, by the time it's integrated so much it's predictable as to where it's going, when it's coming back, who's getting involved. You've got Pinkerton that's now using technological, more scientific detective work, you know, and a reach with 30,000. More people than the military at the time, right? I mean, huge. The private eye, where we get the term private eye. They were using techniques that I loved. How, I forget the guy's name, the one they tied up, you know, and he kind of foreshadows the end about, you know, it's going to be bloody. You know, you're 2-bit thieves. It's over. It's going to be bloody. And the only choice you have is where it's going to happen. I love that in a film or a book where you are told how this is going to end. You're told what's going to happen. And even if you're not paying close attention, this foreshadowing is there. And, you know, I was thinking about the technology changes. And, you know, my dad, when he was growing up, he saw one of the airplane, you know, and he was amazed. I guess it was a biplane. And he'd never seen one before, you know, when he was a kid. And he saw cars for the first time. They rode horses. He was known for having a pinto horse, you know, or paint pony rather instead of a pinto. He was known for that back then. And they did everything on foot, on horseback, in wagon.
And when I was a kid growing up in Mount Enterprise, certainly they had cars. It was the 50s, but you still had people that would come to town in their wagons drawn by horses and mules to get their feed at the feed store, because they were then going to go out to the field and unhitch those horses or mules and plow with them. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up with that, and so I grew up with a certain transition myself. I mean, I saw the first people go to the moon. And my grandmother saw Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. She was born in the 1880s, and she died in the 1980s. She was nearly 100 years old. She told me till the day she died about Buffalo Bill, and I would always listen because she had actually seen him. She was a child when she saw Buffalo Bill Wild West show, or one of its incarnations. I didn't know to even ask that at the time, and I don't even know exactly how old she was. I just know she was a child. And the stuff that she described to me, when I would read about Buffalo Bill, there it was. It was the exact same thing, So that was a memory that was important to her. And I always said, do you miss those old days? She said, oh, no. Because when I first would go to their house, they had an outdoor toilet. They had a well. They didn't have running water. And a lot of people, we always had running water and electricity and stuff, but they didn't. And I saw them get plumbing. I saw them get electricity, and gas, because then they were heating with gas and cooking with gas. The wood stove went out, and the new stove that worked on gas comes in. So even in my lifetime, there's been those transitions. And in you guys' lifetime, every 6 months, the world is different. The technology is different. Yeah. But used to the kind of technology that you experience every 6 months took 10, 15 years. And when I was growing up in Mount Enterprise and Gladewater in the 50s and the 60s, it was pretty much until about the late 60s that you were living 20 years back. Because when the 50s was very much like the 30s, there was a little more money than there had been in the Great Depression. But people looked the same. They had cars that were from the 40s anyway. You would see a lot of those old black bombs. My dad had one even into the 50s because people couldn't afford to replace a car as frequently. And you could buy a house for $1,000. You could buy a car for $300. And then it became a little more expensive. But people's viewpoints about the world were still very much the same because you didn't have all of this technology telling them new things. And television was new. I mean, television was, actually was built back, about 1910 or 1920s. And it became, after World War II, people began to have televisions in their house because now there were stations that could provide, some kind of product. But I remember watching television when it didn't have product. It was in the afternoon, it might go off for a while. And then it would come back on, and then gradually it filled up. And then at 10:30, television was off. It was done. And then they said, well, let's add this Tonight Show. And then, let's add the Late Show. Let's start showing movies. And all of this stuff was older stuff. And when I was watching in the 50s, they had Hopalong Cassidy was these movies. William Boyd were Western movies based on the books Hopalong Cassidy by Mumford. And the books were very, very different, but these became so popular that they were like the Beatles were later on. He was so famous as Hopalong Cassidy that those movies he bought the television rights. Nobody thought you should buy the television rights because they thought it was a fad, because radio was here to stay.
Yeah.
And so he bought all those rights, and then he made new Hopalong Cassidy episodes, and it became the most famous thing in the 50s. And it became the most popular thing along with things like I Love Lucy. And those were the original stuff. And you saw old Tarzan movies, old Flash Gordon serials, Buck Rogers serials. That's what they had on television. So we weren't getting all of this, new information. We were living the 30s and the 40s and that era that was before us. And so, I saw all of that stuff. I didn't know it was old. I'd go to the theater and they would show old serials like The Purple Monster Strikes or stuff with Gene Autry. I didn't know that stuff was old, and comparatively, it wasn't that old. But for a kid, that was old stuff. It was from the 40s. It was amazing. That's the kind of experiences I had because everything dragged behind by 20 years because technology and the social things just didn't move that fast. And now they move like that.
It's breakneck. almost at
Yeah,
a
my
speed
brother
that
and I
our
were
species
17
hasn't
years
evolved
apart.
to do.
Right. I'm just saying my brother and I were 17 years apart, and our lives were very similar.
You know, you said in the documentary you were talking about growing up in a time where radio was the thing, right? And then seeing
It was just beginning to change when I was a kid. Yeah.
yeah, and you were talking about how they were feeding on each other, you know, in a good way. Where
Yes.
there's that transition period, you know, where that takes place
Yeah.
and everything. And
Very
I thought it was so
slow.
fascinating, you know, and I think it's interesting because, you know, back to the, you know, you mentioned the late night shows and that whole medium is the message, that whole McLuhan thing, you know, his I guess most iconic symbol for it would be the light bulb because that doesn't have content, right? It's a light. But look at what that's done. You mentioned stoves having flowing water. Look at how that technology impacts life to such a degree that it becomes integrated to where people can't imagine it without it before the watchdog of the mind realizes that the burglar of the technology has in fact dramatically impacted the society, which is where you have the
Right.
nostalgia, you know, the member berries, right? The idea of, oh my gosh, I don't want to let go of this, even though you know it's over.
Well, the nostalgia is never as wonderful as you remember it. I mean, there are certain aspects of it are. I miss a lot of things about small towns that used to be. Everybody knew everybody, whatever. But I don't miss the racism that, you still have racism, but back then it was accepted. It was part of life. And you don't have the homophobia that you had then, because at that time, homosexual meant pervert. People didn't nuance that. Women, most of them didn't have any real rights. They were property. A lot of children were still that way. I wasn't raised that way, and my mother wasn't like that. But that was still not unusual. I remember men that said every once in a while I have to hit my wife to correct her, and that was not considered odd. You think, what the hell? If I hit my wife, I'd never wake up. She'd wait till I went to bed and kill me, and I wouldn't blame her. I'd never hit my wife. But you see, the point I'm making is that some of that was just accepted. It was so bizarre. And women were always secondary, and they were always there to support the man, and they were always there for, cooking and bed and pregnancy and, that kind of stuff. And you just, my mother, who was born in 1917. My dad was 1909. No, excuse me, my mom was born in 1914. She was a painter, and she was very much ahead of her time, but she got stalled, not necessarily by my dad, because he was willing to let her do whatever she wanted, but society stalled her, and she put her dreams on me, and she liked to read, and she loved writers, and she handed that to me. And my dad handed me self-reliance. He handed me physicality. I was one of those guys that was different than a lot of people that become writers and stuff. I was not a nerd. I was not disliked. I was not unpopular. All that. But I was always different, and I was always different in such a way that I could deal with other people, but yet I never felt entirely comfortable with most people. I found that my interests were different. I wasn't comfortable with a lot of viewpoints that they had. I wasn't interested in what they were interested in. I would read comics, Batman, Superman, the Justice League, when they were first, Justice League was first coming out, and Superman and Batman were beginning to be different. The Flash was the new Flash, all of that stuff. And I knew all that stuff like it was Greek mythology, which in a sense it's American mythology. Yeah. And other kids would like them, but they just didn't have that same connection to them, and it didn't get in their soul like it does for me. The other day, I'm on TV, Stargirl comes on. It's brand new. I'm so excited, my heart is beating faster. And it may not even be any good, but I've watched it and I liked it. I've watched the first 3 episodes and the original seasons of The Flash. I get so excited because it connects me to that good part of nostalgia. And then, eventually they all start to kind of run together after a while and be a lot alike. But I still have hope every time. And for a period of time, they're often exactly what I want. And I'm glad that I've never lost that love and that connection for superheroes and science fiction and fantasy and horror and crime, and yet also, you know, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway and the stuff that they gave, Faulkner, Flannery O'Connor especially, you know, she was wonderful, and Carson McCullers and Harper Lee. I mean, all of that stuff is still magic to me. If you could see my study, it's nothing but books. I have books everywhere, and I have 3 warehouses of them. That's why I'm going to have to finally break down and get rid of them, because I have a lifetime of books. But to me, I walk in there and I pick up Ray Bradbury and I pick up Raymond Chandler and I pull James Cain off. And I've read all of these books, many of them many times, but I will flip them over and read sections. You know, I will read the beginning of Farewell to Arms maybe once a week because it's just so phenomenally written. Or I'll reread Gatsby every 3 or 4 years because it is it's the perfect novel even now. And for our time, it still speaks for this person that's reaching for this American dream, and maybe not the best way, but he's reaching for that green light. And there's a thing where he walks out on the dock and he can see this green light and he reaches for it. And I just think that kind of stuff is so marvelous. And to people to miss out on those things and to live their lives in such a structured and boring way. And I'm not knocking people to go to work. I did that. I'm a blue collar guy. I did all of that. You know, I've fought people for money. I've cleaned toilets. I've done all that shit. So I don't think it's beneath me, and I don't think it's lesser. I think any woman that goes to a job and sticks with it to take care of their family is heroic. But you still have that other side, and to lose that kills what life is worth. And if you begin to find that you're not liking what you liked before, it's because you need something new. And there's plenty out there. And once you find that, you may find that some of the stuff that was kind of losing its luster begins to glow again, you know. Mm-hmm. And I just realized I wasn't going to read Andre Norton for the rest of my life. You know, you mentioned Andre Norton earlier, and I read some of her or whatever, but they had their importance to me. Probably my favorite sentimental writer is Edgar Rice Burroughs, but I can't go back and reread those all the time. I've moved beyond them. I can read the openings and get the same excitement. I can read the endings and get the same excitement, but it's that all the in-between that's become somewhat tedious. But those books changed my life. And there are other books that, you know, will come again. New ones will come, and I will go back and reread some that will do that same thing. But you've constantly got to be reaching out, pulling the old off, getting the new ones, reading people like Chad, you know, who's our guy now, you know, the modern guys now. And you've got to always stay happy. And I'm not talking about people that suffer depression or whatever, but you've got to understand that it is about you to a great extent. And I fortunately don't have that chemical problem, but I always felt that the writer I'm most akin to in attitude was Ray Bradbury. You know, I have that same fascination with all of that. And it changed my life. And when I read comics, I picked those up. I was never the same again. And when I saw films, I was never the same again. And when I began to read books, and I read the Iliad and I read the Odyssey and, you know, all of that stuff, Mark Twain, I go, wow, what is this? This is what I want to do. Because around me, the world was gray. I mean, it felt gray. And then when I started doing this, the color started leaking into things because the 50s seemed gray. You know, and I was just always drawn to it. And I think it's important that we maintain that magic.
I'm big on nostalgia. Like, I'm going through this thing right now. I just turned 50. And
you're a kid.
Yeah. I only really started pursuing trying to pursue writing as a career 6 years ago. And I feel like I've, you know, I told you earlier that I didn't really start reading until I was probably 24. And then, you know, I started a family. So there was a lot of stuff in between, you know, I had bands and stuff like that. There was things in between that kept me from, and I wish I would have started earlier. And lately it's just been on my mind so much. I told Jeremiah this before, that it feels like, and I know I'm only 50. So I don't mean to make myself that old, you know, when you've got a couple of years on me, but it's because I've only been writing, trying to, make this a career for 6 years, it feels almost kind of scary, because I know that it takes time. And I regret
it does.
not.
You have an advantage, though. You have an advantage is that by starting older, you also have more experiences to rely on.
That's
and
true. Yeah.
I'm glad I started young. I really am. I mean, I think a lot of my early stuff is just absolutely awful, but it's how you learn to do it. But if you start late, the advantage is that you now have a lot of personal experience that you can bring to the work. And the other thing is, if you did things you enjoyed, did you like bands?
Oh yeah.
Did you like being in bands?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. What the hell? You didn't waste any time. You did the things you wanted to do. That's what I mean by magic. It's not because you do one thing. It's because you do the other things. Martial arts. I've done it all my life, and I would not have missed it for anything. And I had a double stomach hernia operation last year. I've had all kinds of broken bones and things disconnected, and I would do it again. And I've spent hours when I was first learning to write trying to just put two words together where they didn't sound like I was the uneducated idiot I actually was. I had to learn to spell. My wife could spell. I thank God for spell check on the damn computer. But all of that stuff, I didn't know grammar. I didn't know any of that stuff. But I knew what I wanted. But at the same time, I was a martial artist. I had a family. I had all kinds of interest. I had my kids and their interest, and I've been so happy to see them, expand in the things that they want to do. And they're starting out at a different level, because, I really did I started out with good parents, but I started out at the bottom of the heap. Mm-hmm. I didn't have a lot of money, and we didn't always have the best of things. We always had what we needed. And we thought of ourselves as broke, not poor. But our kids started out at the point when I had money. But I made them go to work. They had to work. They had to pay for their car insurance and their gas and things like that, because you wanted them to have that self-reliance. But still, they traveled all over the world. They got to go to all kinds of interesting events and museums and be exposed to classical music and rockabilly music and soul music and all kinds of music. Some of it I hated, some of it I loved, but I felt that the exposure was important. And I feel good about that, because, we were able to provide that and to have them have a totally different life experience than I had. Not that I'm complaining about mine, but just knowing that they're not going to have to scrape for every damn dollar and count every penny so they can make sure they can not have an interruption in service with the electric bill at the end of the month. So to me, it's not just about, you didn't waste any time if you now mine that time and you dig into it and you put it into the writing. And also, if you lived life during that other time, that time wasn't wasted. When I plowed the mule, I didn't waste time smelling mule farts. It was an amazing time in my life. I did things that were, nobody is doing anymore, and probably, I would never do again. And I loved it. But I don't look at those and say, oh my God, I should have started writing when I was 16 or 17, because I already was. Yeah. But I wasn't thinking of it in that way then. I was doing it because I could not do it. And then at some point, I wanted to do what I'd always wanted to do, was write full time. But in the meantime, I lived life. I went to college and a little bit. And even though I didn't stick with it, there was a famous hair case called Lansdale et al. Versus TJC, where I refused to cut my hair, which was not a lot longer than this, except there was more up here. And I won that case, and you can look it up. It's a classic civil rights case. And I've done all sorts of stuff in my life, and I don't look back on those with regrets. Even mistakes, I look back and say, okay, what can I learn from that? Mm-hmm. Did I learn anything from it? And everybody always said that, oh, you learn from your mistakes, but most people don't learn shit. And most of us don't learn. We don't learn shit from history. We keep doing the same things over and over and over. But you as an individual, I think, can make that decision. You see the way Black people are treated, and especially we're seeing this now. And I'm thinking, really, are we not past this? Are we not moving past understanding that this is about humanity, not about color, and that we can't treat people correctly, and that we can't see wrong when we're looking right at it, you know. But it's got to be up to you, and you've got to look at your life as this wonderful experiment that you are borrowing chemicals from and using them now for you in your work. And what you need to do is say, what did I do then that I can write about now? Mm-hmm. What experiences did I have, both good and bad, and how can I bring them to my work so that when people pick it up, it's in the mouth, it's in the taste. You know, you can actually feel it, and it's not just the monster came out of the woods and he grabbed him by the leg and pulled it off. You know, you don't want that unless it's a joke, you know. But you can bring your experiences, Chad, like your experiences with your father, your experiences about a character that didn't read until he was older, but loved music and did that and found this moment in time. And it could be applied to anything. It could be a straight novel. It could be a science fiction piece because it's still background, even if you throw part of it out. As Hemingway used to talk about the iceberg effect. And that's like, this is the iceberg, but it's underwater, so all you got's here. But if you know what's going on in that scene, then the reader will sense it. And if you know what's going on and you cut a lot of it, the reader will sense what you were after because you boiled it down to the elements that count the most. And that is so true. And everything you've ever learned, you don't have to put it in there for word, but what you know addresses how you present what it is that you write. And if you draw on that, you'll always have something to write about.
You guys are talking about nostalgia and life experience. And, you know, I talked a lot about nostalgia and things like that in our episode about Blue Velvet, David Lynch's Blue Velvet, and kind of the underbelly of nostalgia. I grew up, you know, 62 Cadillacs and stuff, you know, talk radio. That was my upbringing and stuff. But one of the things as I was watching this film is something, there were a number of scenes that immediately just kind of arose within me, this idea that I've been there before. And it was true.
You have.
Because most of the filming was done around Zion National Park in Utah. And when I found that out, I was so happy about it. And it reminded me, I called my dad right afterward, and he's like, "You haven't seen that?" I said, "No." And so we talked and everything. And I asked him, I said, I was wondering if they had recorded at this place where my dad, when he got remarried, he lives out in Palm Springs. He had his bachelor party, and we went up the mountain, right? We go past all the windmills and stuff, and we get up to this mountain area, and there's this really nice but very small saloon, right, style thing. And they have bands up there, right? There are a lot of big bands. And I said, what is this place? And they had this area next to it where they used to make movies. Come to find out, it's called Pappy and Harriet's. It's a very popular place. A lot of musicians have been there. But also, right next to it is a thing called Pioneer Town. And it's smaller in order to make the protagonist look bigger. It's an old trick. And they said, well, look off to your left. And so I looked off to my left, and there was a certain kind of mountain range. And they said, now looked off to your right. It was a different kind. So one was like a plateau. One had those kind of large craggy rocks with stone all over the place. And then one straight ahead had, kind of the classic snow cap. So you have three different styled mountain ranges. And they said there was a trick that you could turn the camera and you would be in a different place, and it wouldn't take long to get over to that mountain, and you could record over there. And so it was an ideal situation. So you could have multiple scenes, multiple different movies, in fact, all recorded in the exact same place. I didn't see anything about Pappy and Harriet's. I didn't see anything about Pioneer Town in the description, but it immediately made me think about it. And I was so glad about Zion National Park, because that's a place that if people haven't been there, they have to go. I mean, it's so beautiful and so gorgeous.
You hit on something else, and you hit it on it indirectly. But sometimes if you read a book or you read a story and you see a film and it's nothing like your life, but you say, I think I've been there, or I think I have felt that way, it's because they have tapped into something that's real to a lot of us. And it may not be exactly what you're seeing, but it's this moment. And it's this internal moment that's been made external in film. In book, it's even, it's more internal. But that comes from somebody borrowing from their own experience or their own excitements, and trying to make something of it. And I think that that's important in books and film, instead of trying to sit down and figure out what's going to scare somebody, because I don't really give a shit. If I scare them, I'm happy. But if that, I don't worry about that. I say, is this something I want to write? And is this scary for me? Then that's fine, or disturbing for me. And then, I go through periods where I just don't care about horror fiction. And I go through periods where I don't care about science fiction or any of it. And then other times I come back and there's nothing that's more glorious to me than those things. Yeah. So, follow your heart,
Jeremiah.
Yeah.
So you got a rating for this movie that Joe made us watch?
Oh, dude. Well, yeah, you really twisted my arm here. Yeah. So, it was amazing. I mean, I love it. It gave me yet another reason. In fact, this is the end of it. I don't even know if I will ever mention this ever again. But Ebert, I am not a fan of that guy's reviews of movies. I watch these movies and I'm like, man, this is an amazing movie. And then he comes out and he's like, that they spent so much on location and wasted time for everything else. I'm like, are you kidding? Or he's complaining about the montage, or he's complaining about the music, or he's complaining about the ending, the freeze frame. And I'm like, this is wonderful. Yes, it was foreshadowed by Etta, where she's telling Sundance, she says, look, I'll go with you. Right to Bolivia, the crazy place. I'll go with you, but I'm not going to watch you die. And guess what? Nobody did. Nobody watched them die. Mm-hmm. Think of how perfect it was. This is why Ebert's he was off his rocker.
I actually like Ebert a lot. I don't agree with that one, but the weird thing about that, and this is another thing about seeing it new, the movie was experimental. In that it started with those, the old kind of sepia look when it was showing the old movie that was somewhat like the Great Train Robbery, but not. And then it gradually moves back and you realize that this is, you're watching a movie within a movie. And then you have that great freeze frame at the back and it goes back to sepia because they're now frozen in the past.
Right.
The world has moved on, but they haven't. And they have also died in a noble, heroic, and somewhat mysterious way, beyond the moment. And I just always, it's just such a fantastic film. Have you seen Little Big Man, by the way?
No, it's on my list though. My dad gave me a whole bunch, including what's that? Willie Boy was here. What is that called?
Tell Him Willie Boy was here.
Tell Him Willie Boy was here. My dad gave me that one. I have a list. But I sit there and I think, and I don't want to beat a dead horse with Ebert, but the thing is I look at the end. I'll just stick with the end, right? No more ad homs. So at the end, to say, look at the sequence of events, right? Devastation, major hope, comedic devastation, working hard to get to that place where you're able to speak the language. And in the meantime, comedic because you go into rob and you don't know how to say the words. Then you find out, then they're kind of taking a more serious route. They're like, well, let's just, we're not going to get in trouble if we don't do crime anymore. And then they find themselves in a real pickle where they end up having to do this. And that's when it comes out that Butch had never killed anybody before. And he's like, and this is the time you decided to tell me, kind of thing. Yeah. And then when all that's done, they get busted by something that they didn't even anticipate. And they're getting shot at and they're misdirected. They think that it's LaFour, right? And so that's who they think it is. So they go in there, they're hiding.
And in real trouble.
Yeah, they're in real trouble. And so they're like, man, what's going on with this? And they're running out of bullets. So there's that suspense. And so they cover, and he goes running out, and he's doing this trick in between the horses. But then he gets shot. I mean, so you think, so it's up, down, and finally.
You call that cover? You call that cover?
Yeah.
He comes back and he's shot. But see, they know they're going to die.
Yeah.
And they talk around it. And it's one of the beautiful things about that film is it's not always on the nose with every scene. It's just off to the side. That's another thing I learned from that film, is not to always be on the nose, to come at it slightly angled. That's one thing my son talks about when he sells screenplays and stuff. And when he talks about is not being on the nose. And I think he learned that from that film, because it's one of his favorite films. In fact, he did a talk on that film on another podcast not long ago. I think he liked the Little Big Man better, and it's very, very, very good.
So at the end, they're sitting there and they're chuckling it up, shot, right? Hilarious interaction. You mentioned it earlier. And then they have to make this decision. And I thought, and I wonder, I could understand the argument that they knew they were dead, right? On the other hand, I think there's a way to look at it that says, did they believe that they were being followed by this was this one guy? And there was a dramatic irony in the fact that by the time they busted out there thinking, now this is going to be hard enough dealing with whoever we're dealing with. But by the time they got out there, they were dealing with something and I won't tell everybody because it's something.
No, I don't think they knew that what they were dealing with. I think they thought they were in a bad pickle, but I think they also had been able to escape from a lot of different situations. And just like in the movie, in reality, the way they got caught is they found a burro or a donkey with that mark on it. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happened in real life. And they ended up in this little cabin, or somewhat, it's a little different in the film, but similar. And I think that one of the things that makes it such a good film is that it has so many real moments. It's what I was talking about in your own life, is borrowing from reality and building your fiction within and around reality. Because if you go read about Butch Cassidy, you'll go, oh my God, that's in the movie. Oh, that really happened. But what he did was be able to build the characters in the way he wanted to present them. And Butch was very much like that. I mean, just like that whole thing, well, I can't tell you I won't rob again, but I'll do this. And everybody liked Butch. The criminals liked him, the law liked him, because he was a likable guy, and he was a man of his word. And yet he was a bank robber and a train robber. First bank robbed was in Telluride. Which is very interesting, because the bank is still there, and they have the big safe that he robbed, and all that. But he was just a small timer that decided he wanted to be a big timer, and he would have horses where they would do relays and change horses. Nobody had ever done that before. Yeah. He wasn't like Jesse Gaines and people like that. His whole idea was get in, don't hurt anybody. We get out, and where everybody else gets caught is because they don't have horses in relay. They don't have this stuff set up. But we will. And then he had the hole in the wall where they would go to, and it was such a hideout. Nobody wanted to go up in there because they might not come out.
Yeah. So I think all those things considered, and given the fact that it is the last thing I'll say about it, given the fact that it is, for a Western, it did something curious, and that it made not only kind of a duo, right, a bromance where they're getting away and everything, and you don't have the good guy is the bad guy, and the bad guy, the kind of nefarious presence, are the good guys, right? And so you kind of have a Soprano, like what we would later see with Sopranos, where it humanizes the villain. So it's not so much of the Schneidly Whiplash thing.
It was maybe not the first buddy movie, but it was certainly one of the buddy movies that influenced a lot of buddy movies thereafter. And people forget that too. That was the one that influenced the modern idea of the buddy movie.
Yeah,
and they continued it in Sting and things like it. It's an influential film.
So with all of those, yes, it's an influential film. It's all the aforementioned. And honestly, because
seen, Ride the High Country.
Which one?
Ride the High Country, Sam Peckinpah.
No.
My favorite film by Sam Peckinpah, and I like it even better than The Wild Bunch.
I'm writing it right down now.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic, and it's the transition of the old-fashioned film into this modern film is what Sam's doing with it. And it's just a very interesting film, and it's my favorite of his films. But it is kind of a buddy film too, and I think you should see it. And there's some influence of it in Bubba Hotep, a story I wrote and that was filmed. And there's a mild influence of that, especially in the later scenes in the film.
I saw that recently. I saw Bubba Hotep recently. I want to read the book. But as for this movie, I'll finish it up by simply saying, for me, because it is a classic, because it is, in my opinion, practically perfect, I would give it a 4.9 out of 5. And I think it's rightfully placed. If there was a canon that says, if we send it off to the aliens, and maybe we already have, right, to say it's in one of those capsules, man, we've sent it out, that if it's out there, man, better have Sundance. But what do you think, Chad? Before we get to Joe's take, what's yours, man? How would you rate this film, buddy?
I had seen it before, but it was weird. I only remember a couple scenes. I don't know if it was back in my drinking days that I saw it or what, but the first time. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm glad that Joe picked it, and I am going to dock it a star for the soundtrack. But I'm 4 stars easy. It's entertaining. It holds up really well, and which I was surprised. And I thought Redford and Newman were just great together. I like any buddy, film, the platonic romance stuff. And this was really good. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I got to see it again. So yeah, I gave it 4 stars. What about yourself, Joe? It's probably easy 5-star for you.
It is a 5-star for me.
The
soundtrack doesn't matter to me for this one.
Yeah.
Even this Raindrops Fall on My Head, I actually like it. And I like it because the scene is about that idea of modern music and modern, the bicycle and all that, and then it failing. And I don't remember the other music you're talking about, but I saw it just last year. I see it about every other year, but I think it's it's my 3rd favorite film of all time, and I give it 5 stars, And my favorite film is To Kill a Mockingbird, and I give it 5 stars. And my next favorite film is Casablanca, and I give it, those 3 are all 5-star films for me, because they did more than just be a film. They changed my life, all 3 of them. And the source for the book, To Kill a Mockingbird, certainly. And now I've read, of course, a lot of Goldman, and I've read his screenplays, including Butch, because of that film. So all of those, the impact goes beyond even just the viewing of the film and its impact. It's the residuals as well.
I'll just say this real quick. You mentioned the whole thing about the bike scene. And I thought it was interesting that they said that Paul Newman did the stunts for that because the stuntman couldn't
stay on the
couldn't do it. The only stunt that he didn't do was where he crashes into the area. He crashes.
Right.
And but Robert Redford, he wasn't one up because Robert Redford was doing his own stunts, including the train running on top. But it really upset Newman because he's like, I don't want my guy to die. He's like, I don't want to see him hurt. And the whole stunt angle to that, especially the scene where they're blowing up the car and stuff. That was an impactful thing. People even with balsa wood
when they actually jumped off of into the water. But when he was jumping along the train, that you could see him.
Yeah. I thought that was really interesting.
A lot of people like Newman and McQueen and all those people back then, a lot of them did their own stunts, because that was just part of it. And if you see The Great Escape, Steve McQueen doesn't do all of the motorcycle riding, but he does a lot of it. Another one of my favorite movies is The Great Escape.
One more bit of trivia that I almost forgot to say that I thought was pretty cool was that this was actually Sam Elliott's debut film. He was credited as card player number 2. Didn't show his face or nothing.
I forgot that. I did know that little bit of trivia. That opening scene is so wonderful when instead of the usual you say that smile. Here's Butch going, oh man, this could go either way. Mm-hmm. This could go bad. And then he's saying, hey, you get older every day. It's a law. And then he's telling that guy, well, Sundance, and he throws that word out there. So you think this is my last card, and we'll see if that has any. And it did. It had impact on the other guy. And I thought that was great. Or the one where Sundance is trying to show the guy his shooting skill, and he can't hit anything. And then he says, can I move?
Yeah.
And then it's that whole idea that, he can on the move.
Didn't Catherine Ross end up marrying
Sam Elliott.
Sam Elliott.
Yes, Sam Elliott.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, still married. Yeah, they've been married a long time.
That was, I think,
maybe they met there. I don't know.
I think they did meet there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, Jeremiah, watching Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, you know, you're sitting there and you're seeing, kind of experiencing something new and maybe even learning something. Is there anything that you walked away from this film that maybe you could implement in your own life and make you a better person or just a better man or anything?
Yeah, man. You know, I mean, you got friends, you've got enemies, you go through hard times. And I mean, if you're somebody like me, you kind of stack them up over, racking them up. There's a lot of them that come your way, a little bit controversial at times. And if I'm ever, you know, ducking and running, you know, and going for cover, and I'm hearing all of the arguments and everything coming my way and trolls from every which direction, I'm not just going to presume that it is my arch nemesis, because there may in fact be a Bolivian army waiting outside for me. And so I've decided, you know, I'll give up on that, man. I said, I've seen this before. I know the script. And so that's what I would say. I'd say, look, you know, never underestimate your enemy, and never assume that the person that you think is coming after you is alone.
All right.
What do you take away from this, man? If you had a moral to all of this, I mean, you're sagacious. You know, you I think we've mentioned before, we've already outed the whole rigmarole you go through. You climb up a mountain and, you know, do your ohms and stuff when you process this. You know, what is it that you took away from this after watching it? You know, what that you could apply to your life and even maybe encourage other people to apply to theirs?
You know, Jeremiah, if you and I were bank robbers and there was like a beautiful woman that was probably into both of us, you know,
Yeah.
I'd be staying at home, snuggling with her, tightening that bond while you eventually got caught and chased off to Bolivia to live with the pigs. Sorry, man.
Oh, man. You'd do that to me, wouldn't you, Chad? Oh.
I would.
Yeah, for the women. But, you know, hey, I would have to forgive you, dude, because, you know, I'd know you'd be hooking it up fat. So,
the importance of a good woman. Joe has he's had some great women in his life. His wife encouraged him to write. She not only encouraged him, but held him accountable, made sure that it happened. And my wife, and I know your wife too, my wife, certainly, I wouldn't be able to do it without her, man. There's just no way. This whole writing thing, she's my biggest cheerleader. So I'll put a good woman over a friend any day.
Yeah. And you know, I always think I talk to female friends of mine that are writers, and the ones that do best have supportive husbands or, you know, a supportive spouse, be it, you know, two women, two men, whatever. It's got to be somebody supportive. And because you need that. And especially if you fly off in all kinds of universes like writers do. I think I'm fairly grounded for a writer. I'm one of those people I think is, you know, really pretty grounded. But nonetheless, I don't know that I would be had I not met my wife.
That's legit.
So,
yeah.
This one's for the ladies, I guess.
It's for the ladies, man. Yeah.
Joe, thanks so much for coming on and
man.
hanging out for this long. It's been fun to like actually kind of get to meet you and get to know you, you know, even more, and hang out and talk about one of your favorite movies and other stuff.
Yeah.
Hear all your cool stories.
We'll have to do something like it again. We still got to ride the High Country Man and Little Big Man.
Yes, man. Yes.
That's
Willie Boy, man. And Willie Boy.
Tell him Willie Boy. That's a good one too. I don't hold it quite as high esteem, but it's good.
Yeah. And I've got on the docket, I've got Cold in July. I've got it in the docket. I watched the preview, and my wife and I just jaws dropped, and I said, yes, we are watching it.
Let me tell you a secret. The book's better.
Yeah. And speaking of books, you know, speaking of books, you know, I actually told Chad I wouldn't do this anymore because it's become a terrible custom of encouraging our listeners to send him stacks of books. Right? He does not want that. But you were talking about one day you've got these factories, and I bet you Chad would accept a few of those. And I know I would if you, because I'm looking for stacks of books, and especially your books, you know, because you're good, and you're not just a good writer. And you've not just had a big influence on one of the greatest friends that a man could ever even ask for. I mean that from my heart about Chad. We go back a long way. We've seen each other through some crazy things, But listening to you,
the movie you saw tonight.
Yes,
talked about tonight.
Right. Mm-hmm. But hearing you and hearing others speak about you, hearing your wife talk about you, hearing your children talk about you, your friends talk about you, and then hearing you talk about you and them. It's you're not just a great writer. You seem like a really fantastic man.
I can't vouch for that, but thanks.
Yeah. So I only say that. Not to it's just hurl flattery. It's my favorite brew, but maybe not everybody's. But at the same time, I mean it. I'm really sincerely grateful to have somebody like Chad that told me about your work, because it may not be the exact same as Chad learning from his dad and getting that book, but it is a little bit. There was something somebody said in that documentary that they said, every time I think I'm done and I've exhausted Lansdale somehow out of somewhere, there's another one. And I see that as an awesome opportunity. I'm happy to hear that, because what I've experienced so far in the conversation we had and the kind of recommendations you have and stuff and your list, man, I love it. And so I'm excited to learn more about you and your work. And I'm really grateful you came on.
Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate you guys, and it's good to sort of almost meet you in person. And maybe that will happen in the near future. We'll actually get to see each other and have a face-to-face conversation.
Yeah.
When we're all over disease,
Yeah. Yes.
The plague is gone.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to tell you guys good night, because my pit bull wants to go outside.
Yeah.
And he keeps bouncing on my leg going, "Hey, Dad, I need to go out." So
perfect.
All right, Joe.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you again. Great.
Hey, good night.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yo, what's going on, everybody? My name is Duncan, and I'm the host of the podcast Hash Time with Duncan. On this show, I tackle all the biggest sports stories between the hashes and beyond. If it's a big story, I'm going to talk about it and give you my opinion on it. Subscribe to my show wherever you get your podcast. All you have to do, search Hash Time with Duncan. And you can follow the show on Twitter at Hash Time with D. Peace.